German Shepherd and puppies begged this old man to come into his house. What did he do that made everyone cry? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. In that remote corner of the Wyoming woods, not a single bird sang. No deer stirred. Nothing moved except the flickering glow of the wood stove inside the cabin and the snow tapping insistently against the window panes. Walter Granger sat in his old leather chair, a bottle of whiskey untouched beside him. He was used to the silence. After the sudden death of his wife, solitude had become his only companion, one as constant and heavy as the snow outside. But the scratching at the door, that was something else. At first it was faint, barely more than a whisper. Then came another, stronger, sharper, like claws pleading through wood. Walter rose slowly, bracing himself with his cane, his hand instinctively reaching for the shotgun mounted beside the fireplace. When he opened the door, the sight before him nearly took the breath from his 70-year-old lungs. A white German Shepherd stood at his porch, still, trembling, but with a quiet composure that spoke of desperate strength. At her side were 3 drenched pups, shivering from the cold. One of them couldn't stand properly, its front leg buckled, twisted at a sick angle in the snow. Walter locked eyes with the mother dog for a long silent moment. Then, wordlessly, he leaned the shotgun back against the wall. "Damn fool, Walter," he muttered under his breath, yet his hand moved to swing the door open wider. The mother didn't charge in. Instead, she lowered her head slowly and nudged the injured pup forward. Walter knelt, taking his flashlight and gently examining the wound. The leg was torn open, metal trap wounds. The skin had been ripped, and blood had frozen into the snow. The pup whimpered softly. "You poor little thing," Walter said quietly. "Left to die, huh?" "Not today." Without hesitation, he brought in an old mattress from the shed and laid it by the fire. There was something about the way the mother dog moved. Cautious, yes, but not fearful. Trusting, almost. He fetched an old first aid kit, some gauze, antiseptic, and balm. He wasn't a vet, but he'd grown up around dogs. He knew the language of pain, and more importantly, of comfort. Each time the pup whimpered, the mother pressed her head lightly against Walter's arm, as if reminding him, "Careful, please. That's my child. I ain't no miracle worker," he muttered, wrapping the paw as gently as he could. "But I know when an animal needs love more than medicine." The next morning, when Walter stepped outside to check the water bowl, something made him freeze. In the snow were paw prints, carefully arranged, not random. 5 parallel lines like tracks. A circle in the center, scratched into the ice, and beside them, a crude drawing, the outline of a house. His house. "Oh my God," Walter whispered. "Are they asking me to follow?" When he grabbed his coat and gear and stepped toward the edge of the woods, the mother dog didn't stop him. She just looked back once, then turned and started walking. It took nearly 4 hours. The snow deepened, and Walter's joints screamed in protest, but he pressed on. What he found left his heart pounding. An old, half-collapsed compound, likely an abandoned breeding facility. Inside, 2 more pups huddled in a rusted cage, shivering, their eyes wide with fear. The other cages were broken, blood-stained and empty. Walter broke the latch with an iron bar, wrapped the pups inside his coat, and turned back toward home. The mother was waiting at the cabin door when he returned. That night, beneath the flickering firelight, Walter sat with a cup of hot tea, watching the pups sleep curled together, the mother dog resting protectively beside them. And for the first time in years, Walter Granger wept. He didn't cry for grief or loneliness. He cried for something he'd thought long forgotten, that even in a world so often cold and cruel, compassion still lived. Justice, somehow, still had a pulse. And sometimes it came scratching at your door in the middle of a snowstorm, on 4 legs, with eyes full of trust. The fire in the old stove crackled as the wind howled around Walter Granger's cabin. Though the storm outside roared louder than the whisper of his thoughts, inside the little shed behind his home, there was an unexpected warmth. Walter knelt beside the injured pup, its leg now wrapped carefully with layers of gauze, and a bit of wool torn from one of his old shirts. The mother dog lay close, eyes never leaving him, her breath slow and steady. The other two pups slept curled up beside the fire he had coaxed to life with trembling hands and patience he didn't know he still had. He sat back with a groan, his knees protesting after too long on the cold wooden floor. The last few hours had stirred something long dormant in him, a sense of purpose that hadn't visited since Clara passed away. He poured a bit of broth into a bowl and slid it toward the mother dog. She didn't move at first, watching him warily, but when Walter leaned back and gave her space, she crept forward, lapping slowly. Only when the pups stirred did she nudge the bowl toward them, offering the little warmth she had found. Walter chuckled, a sound foreign to his throat. "Selfless mom, aren't you?" Later that night, after checking on the dogs once more, he locked up the shed and returned to the cabin. But sleep didn't come easily. His dreams were filled with vague images, shadows in the snow, cages, distant whimpering. The next morning, the world outside had turned into a sea of white, fresh snow, covering every trace of the journey they had taken. Walter bundled up and carried warm water and a bit of leftover oatmeal to the shed. But something had changed. The mother dog stood alert near the door, her ears twitching, her nose lifted to the wind. "What's out there, girl?" Walter whispered, uneasy. The dogs remained restless all morning. That afternoon, Walter spotted tire tracks in the snow near the lower trail, a path that hadn't been used in years. He followed them a short way and found something chilling. An old rusted sign half buried in snow, with faded letters barely legible. Northridge Canine Development Facility, he remembered now. The compound deep in the woods, supposedly shut down years ago after allegations of illegal breeding and mistreatment. He'd thought it abandoned. That night he kept his rifle close. The following day, around dusk, it happened. A low rumble of engines, headlights through the trees. Walter stepped onto his porch, shotgun in hand. A black SUV idled at the edge of the clearing. Two men in heavy coats stepped out, one holding a clipboard, the other scanning the area. "Evening," Walter called, voice firm. They approached cautiously. "Mr. Granger?" The taller one asked. "We're from Ridgefield Security. We're following a report of missing property. Dangerous animals escaped from a private training site. Have you seen any dogs in the area?" Walter didn't flinch. "Plenty of wildlife around these parts. Why?" The man gave a thin smile. "Just need to recover what's ours. They're tagged government property. Technically." Walter noticed the bulge beneath the man's coat, a sidearm. "Not on my land, they're not," Walter said flatly. "You got a warrant." The man stiffened. "We were hoping to keep this informal." "Yeah, I wasn't." The conversation ended quickly. The men left, but not before glancing toward the shed. Walter stood outside long after they disappeared, breath misting in the cold air. Inside the shed, the dogs had gone silent. The mother sat in front of the pups, her eyes fixed on the door. "They know," Walter murmured. "They remember." That night he didn't sleep. Instead, he packed supplies, loaded a sled, and made a decision. Just before dawn, Walter opened the shed door. "Come on," he said. "We're going somewhere safe." The dogs followed without hesitation. And as the first light touched the Wyoming snow, an old man with a sled and a family of dogs vanished into the forest, not fleeing but choosing. Choosing kindness. Choosing kindness. Choosing courage. And somewhere, deep in the trees, justice waited. But so did hope. The fire in the old stove crackled as the wind howled around Walter Granger's cabin. Though the storm outside roared louder than the whisper of his thoughts, inside the little shed behind his home, there was an unexpected warmth. Walter knelt beside the injured pup, its leg now wrapped carefully with layers of gauze, and a bit of wool torn from one of his old shirts. The mother dog lay close, eyes never leaving him, her breath slow and steady. The other two pups slept curled up beside the fire he had coaxed to life with trembling hands and patience he didn't know he still had. He sat back with a groan, his knees protesting after too long on the cold wooden floor. The last few hours had stirred something long dormant in him, a sense of purpose that hadn't visited since Clara passed away. He poured a bit of broth into a bowl and slid it toward the mother dog. She didn't move at first, watching him warily, but when Walter leaned back and gave her space, she crept forward, lapping slowly. Only when the pups stirred did she nudge the bowl toward them, offering the little warmth she had found. Walter chuckled, a sound foreign to his throat. "Selfless mom, aren't you?" Later that night, after checking on the dogs once more, he locked up the shed and returned to the cabin. But sleep didn't come easily. His dreams were filled with vague images, shadows in the snow, cages, distant whimpering. The next morning, the world outside had turned into a sea of white, fresh snow covering every trace of the journey they had taken. Walter bundled up and carried warm water and a bit of leftover oatmeal to the shed. But something had changed. The mother dog stood alert near the door, her ears twitching, her nose lifted to the wind. "What's out there, girl?" Walter whispered, uneasy. The dogs remained restless all morning. That afternoon, Walter spotted tire tracks in the snow near the lower trail, a path that hadn't been used in years. He followed them a short way and found something chilling, an old rusted sign half buried in snow with faded letters barely legible. Northridge Canine Development Facility. He remembered now. The compound deep in the woods, supposedly shut down years ago after allegations of illegal breeding and mistreatment. He'd thought it abandoned. That night, he kept his rifle close. The following day, around dusk, it happened. A low rumble of engines, headlights through the trees. Walter stepped onto his porch, shotgun in hand. A black SUV idled at the edge of the clearing. Two men in heavy coats stepped out, one holding a clipboard, the other scanning the area. "Evening," Walter called, voice firm. They approached cautiously. "Mr. Granger?" the taller one asked. "We're from Ridgefield Security. We're following a report of missing property. Dangerous animals escaped from a private training site. Have you seen any dogs in the area?" Walter didn't flinch. Plenty of wildlife around these parts. "Why?" The man gave a thin smile. "Just need to recover what's ours. They're tagged, government property, technically." Walter noticed the bulge beneath the man's coat, a sidearm. "Not on my land, they're not," Walter said flatly. "You got a warrant?" The man stiffened. "We were hoping to keep this informal." "Yeah? I wasn't." The conversation ended quickly. The men left, but not before glancing toward the shed. Walter stood outside long after they disappeared, breath misting in the cold air. Inside the shed, the dogs had gone silent. The mother sat in front of the pups, her eyes fixed on the door. "They know," Walter murmured. "They remember. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he packed supplies, loaded a sled, and made a decision. Just before dawn, Walter opened the shed door. "Come on," he said. "We're going somewhere safe." The dogs followed without hesitation. And as the first light touched the Wyoming snow, an old man with a sled and a family of dogs vanished into the forest, not fleeing but choosing kindness, choosing courage. And somewhere, deep in the trees, justice waited. But so did hope. The silence of the forest was complete, broken only by the crunch of Walter's boots and the quiet whimpers of the pup in the sled behind him. The snow-covered trail wound through thick trees, the morning sky above gray and unyielding. Walter guided the sled with care, pausing often to let the mother dog check on her pups. They stopped near a shallow ravine, a place Walter remembered from long ago, a hunting shelter he'd built with his brother when they were boys. It was still standing, albeit tilted and weather-worn, but it would do. As he settled the dogs inside, spreading old blankets and making a small fire in the rock-ringed hearth, Walter caught the mother dog staring at him again. Her eyes were steady, dark, and filled with something more than animal instinct. Gratitude? Recognition? Or maybe it was grief. Later, as he applied fresh salve to the injured pup's paw, the mother dog began to lick its face gently, murmuring in low, comforting whines. Walter froze. That sound, so tender and rhythmic, reached into a place he had locked away. It had been 15 years since the accident. Since they lost Emily, his daughter had been 7. A snowstorm much like this. Clara had taken her to the frozen lake for skating. A crack in the ice, the sound of Clara's screams, the stillness that followed. Walter had buried them both on the ridge where the morning sun first touched the snow, and from that moment the world had dulled. Joy was something other people wore on holidays. Grief became his second skin. But watching the mother dog nuzzle her injured pup, Walter felt a break in the ice around his own heart. Not a flood, not even a trickle, just a crack. He reached out, running a gnarled hand down the mother dog's back. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned into the touch, pressing her weight gently against him. Walter whispered, "You lost something too, didn't you?" The fire crackled softly in the silence. For the first time in years, Walter didn't feel alone. That night he wrote a letter by lantern light, not to anyone alive but to Emily. "Dear Emmy, you always wanted a dog. I remember how you begged me, and I said no, because dogs meant messes and barking and chewing up furniture. You said you'd train it yourself. I never gave in. But now there's this family here. They came to me, Emmy, in the storm. Like you once came to me crying with scraped knees and big eyes that trusted I could fix anything. I don't know what it means, but I'm listening. Love, Dad." He folded the letter and tucked it in his coat pocket, close to his heart. The next morning, a snowshoe hare darted through the clearing, and one of the pups chased after it playfully, yipping. Walter chuckled, shaking his head. Pup returned, triumphant with a pine cone in its jaws. "Mighty hunter," Walter praised. The day passed in quiet chores, melting snow for water, boiling bits of dried meat and root vegetables, splitting more firewood. He kept glancing up, half expecting another SUV to appear. Instead, a snow crow landed near the shelter, cawing loudly. The mother dog bristled, standing alert. Walter stepped outside and squinted toward the trail. Nothing, but the quiet had changed. They weren't safe yet. Not even close. The threat from humans in the days that followed, Walter began noticing unsettling signs. Snowmobile tracks cut through the untouched drifts near the edge of his property. Deep, fresh, and deliberate. More troubling still were the empty shell casings he found near the old logging trail behind his woodshed. Someone had been close, armed and watching. At first he dismissed it as late-season hunters ignoring regulations, but when he found a small plastic tag buried in the snow near the kennels, marked with a serial number and a faint logo, Walter's heart sank. He recognized the brand, Everguard Canine Solutions, a name that had come up in hushed tones on the local news 2 months ago. A government raid had shut down one of their illegal canine training camps, exposing horrifying methods used on animals bred for private security and high-stakes combat testing. His gut twisted. These weren't just stray dogs. The mother and her pups. They had escaped, fled from a place no creature should have been kept. Walter returned to the kennel behind his cabin where the mother shepherd, whom he had begun calling Mira, sat curled around her pups. The injured one, now walking with a slight limp, perked up as he approached. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" Walter murmured, crouching down beside them. Mira didn't flinch, only met his eyes with an unwavering gaze. There was no fear there anymore, only a kind of tired resilience. That night he didn't sleep. Instead, he sat by the fire with an old file folder spread across his lap. It contained yellowed maps, notes from his time in the Forest Service, and an access code he hadn't used in over 20 years. He remembered the cave system, deep in the western ridge, nearly unreachable in winter, but known to him like the lines on his palm. If Mira and the pups were to survive, they'd need a place no one would find them. But Walter also knew he couldn't do it alone anymore. His hands trembled, his knees ached, he needed help, and that meant stepping back into a world he had long abandoned, a world of radios, codes, and contacts that owed him favors buried in the snow of old missions. At first light, he radioed someone he hadn't spoken to in 15 years, Chief Ranger Eliza Crowley, his former partner and the only person who knew about the things Walter had done and regretted. "I've got 4 fugitives here," he said, voice hoarse. "Not human, but more innocent than most." There was a long pause. Then, "Send coordinates outside." Mira lifted her head, ears twitching. Walter placed another log on the fire, then whispered to her, "They'll come for you, but this time, we'll be ready." Message left in the snow as the feeble morning sunlight filtered through the small window. Walter Granger stepped outside, his boots sinking into the thick layer of fresh snow that had fallen the night before. He expected nothing more than the familiar biting cold, but the paw print circling his yard made him freeze in place. These were not random tracks. The mother dog, whom Walter had named Mira, along with her 3 pups, had departed the previous night after their wounds had fully healed. Mira had spent hours licking his face as if in gratitude before they left, but now, in the pristine white snow, there was a perfect circle formed by dozens of deliberate paw prints, almost ritualistic in nature. At the center of this circle was a crude symbol etched with claws, a simple arch, and a few wavy lines resembling a stream leading to it. Walter knelt down, running his hand over the markings. Memories from his time as a forest ranger resurfaced. He had seen similar symbols in old military topographic maps. The arch represented a cave or shelter. The wavy lines indicated a stream. There was only one place that matched this depiction: Ridge Hollow Camp, a training site abandoned after a forest fire nearly 12 years ago. He couldn't remain idle. If Mira had intentionally left this sign, then that place wasn't safe. And if other dogs were still trapped there, Walter prepared a pack: flashlight, knife, bandages, jerky, and his old, recently cleaned rifle. Something deep within him stirred, not out of obligation, but a silent vow. The journey through the forest took over 3 hours. The thick snow and rugged terrain made each step a challenge. Yet, he remembered every rock, every bent tree, every charred pine stump, as if his memory had been waiting for this day to awaken. As he approached Ridge Hollow Camp, the atmosphere shifted. The wind died down, leaving only the sound of his heavy breathing and the rhythm of his aging heart. Walter pressed against the crumbling wall of an old barrack. Inside, through a narrow gap, he saw a shadow move, small, trembling, with fearful eyes. It was a puppy, emaciated and clearly confined. Walter didn't hesitate. He used a crowbar to pry open the door, each breath stifled by the stench of decay and neglect. The puppy retreated to a corner, but when its eyes met his, something softened. "I'm here to take you home," he whispered. Just then a sharp sound echoed behind him. "Old man, don't do anything foolish." Walter turned, his rifle already in hand. A man in camouflage stepped out from the trees, rifle aimed directly at him. He wasn't alone. 2 others, faces masked, eyes as cold as the winter surrounding them. "That's our property. Hand it over, and you might walk away." Walter's gaze didn't waver. "I don't care about your twisted claims. Dogs aren't property, especially not when they're starved like this." The leader smirked, stepping forward, but a low growl resonated from the forest's edge. Not aggressive, but a clear warning. From the snow-laden shadows, Mira emerged. Her amber eyes gleamed, her scarred body poised with authority. Behind her stood 2 other large dogs, possibly former comrades. The men instinctively stepped back. The leader raised his rifle, but Walter cocked his own. "One more step and you'll learn what frontier justice means." No one moved, only the wind, the snow, and locked gazes. Eventually, the intruders retreated, their heavy footsteps disrupting the tense silence. Mira approached Walter, gently nudging his leg with her muzzle. A silent thank you. Walter returned to the barrack, wrapping the frail puppy in the blanket he'd brought. As he left the camp, he felt he wasn't alone. Mira, the 2 other dogs, and her 3 pups followed closely with each step. That evening, Walter's cabin glowed warmly. He brewed tea, placed a loaf of bread near the hearth, while the dogs curled around him. The new puppy was named Lucky, for surviving and for trusting the messages left in the snow. And Walter, in his fitful sleep, saw a vision of his late daughter, smiling at the doorway, her hand gently resting on the mother dog's head. A silent message from the wild, that sometimes, to heal our own losses, we must follow the tracks left in the snow. The snow fell again that night. The snow had begun to fall again as Walter Granger quietly guided his snowmobile home, 2 puppies bundled tightly inside the thick coat he wore. The wind lashed against his face, but his heart was warmer than it had been in years. Not because of the fire waiting in the hearth, but because of what he had just witnessed. A silent, irrational, yet powerful trust, placed in him by a mother dog. As he neared the house, he saw Mira, the mother dog, sitting at the forest's edge. She didn't bark or growl, just sat there in the snow like a statue of patience. Walter got off the snowmobile, knelt down, and gently placed the 2 pups into a blanket-lined basket he had prepared. Mira stepped forward, licked each of their foreheads, inspecting them, and then gently pressed her head to Walter's leg, as if to say thank you. That night, The old shed glowed with the firelight from the small wood stove. Walter made tea and cooked soft chicken porridge for the dogs. Small whimpers escaped as the pups slowly realized they were warm and safe. Mira curled beside them but never took her eyes off Walter, as if making sure he was still there. Walter sat in his worn old chair, not drinking his tea, just watching the fire burn. In his mind, the memory of his little daughter, Ellie, who had died one winter long ago, played like an old film reel. She too had once shivered like this in his arms during a high fever. But tonight, instead of helpless tears, he felt as if Ellie were smiling from somewhere far away, offering him a second chance at love. The next morning, the snowfall had stopped, but the sky remained heavy and gray. Walter rose early, stepping outside to check the tracks around the house. Then he stopped. In a smooth patch of snow behind the house, new markings had appeared. Once again, paw prints, but this time arranged in a spiral leading to a shape resembling a hill with a cave entrance. Next to it was a black dot, made perhaps with sap or ink. And beside that, a crude drawing of a chain. Walter's heart clenched. There's more, isn't there? A few hours later, with Mira and one of the older dogs beside him, Walter set out again. This time, the trail led through old trees, across a frozen stream, and along a ridgeline, once the site of a pre-war mining camp. In the gloom of a rocky cave, he found 3 more cages. Inside them, skeletal German shepherd pups huddled, one barely conscious. Walter broke the locks and fed them dry food, helping them drink water from his cupped hands. Mira stood behind him, growling low as the sound of engines echoed through the trees. Not wind, snowmobiles, at least 2 coming fast. Walter knew he didn't have much time. He wrapped the weakest pups in spare coats and motioned to Mira and her companion to lead the way back. But just as they turned to go, a voice rang out, "Don't move, Onad! Those dogs are ours!" 3 men stepped from the shadows in camouflage gear, guns raised. Walter set the bags down slowly. He hadn't held a weapon since his forest ranger days, but never imagined he'd need to face one again like this. "They're not property," Walter said calmly. "They're lives, and they've chosen me." One of the men stepped forward, rage in his eyes. But before he could act, Mira surged forward like a streak of white, not to attack, but to place herself between Walter and the men, snarling like a mother protecting her last hope. Something about her stance made them freeze. The fire in her eyes wasn't wild. It was maternal. For a long moment, the leader lowered his gun. "Forget it, not worth it." They vanished into the trees without another word, leaving behind a thick, tense silence. Back home, Walter called the local ranger station. An old friend still worked there. He reported everything, stressing that illegal training camps were still active in the forest. More importantly, he proposed creating a recovery program for the rescued dogs, right there, on his farm. A week later, the first small truck arrived, bringing supplies, gratitude, and 2 young veterinary students. Mira no longer hid. She stood proudly, watching them work like a colleague, not a pet. And on a rare sunny morning, when Walter placed his hand on Mira's head and said, "From now on, this is your home," the elderly neighbor standing nearby wiped away tears, not because of the rare bond between man and dog, but because she knew that in that weathered wooden cabin, a lonely heart had finally found family again. Twilight Messenger, and the letter that stilled every heart a week after the visit from the local ranger team. Walter Granger had become a name quietly whispered among wildlife conservation circles, not because of his age or past as a ranger, but because he was the first to prove the extraordinary near-social behavior of a group of dogs once labeled as strays. The ranger station had sent reports to the Federal Animal Protection Agency, complete with images of paw-printed maps, footage of Mira's protective instincts, and interactions that defied everything known about canine behavior. But on a rare sunny Friday afternoon, as Walter trimmed the grass near the renovated rescue shed, a stranger appeared at the end of the dirt road leading to his farm. The man looked to be in his 40s, dressed in dark leather, a gray cap shadowing cautious eyes. He didn't step into the yard, simply stood there, waiting, almost respectfully. Walter wiped the sweat from his brow, put down the trimmer, and called out, "You need something?" The man walked forward slowly, pulling a weathered brown envelope from his coat. "Someone asked me to bring this to you, Mr. Granger." Walter took the letter. The paper felt rough beneath his fingers, sealed with a strange red wax stamp that stirred some long-forgotten memory. "Who sent it?" he asked. "Someone you once saved. Or rather, someone who once tried to destroy what you're protecting now." Without waiting for a response, the man turned and walked away, leaving Walter alone with the trembling envelope in his hand. That evening, in the quiet glow of the fire, Walter sat alone, Mira lying beside him. He opened the envelope gently, as though afraid it might tear open a memory too fragile to touch. "Mr. Granger, if you're reading this, I've already left, not running, but finally understanding. I was one of the 3 men in the trees near the quarry, the quiet one. The one who never raised his gun. I used to work at that training camp, got paid to keep my mouth shut while dogs were drugged, locked away, and trained in ways nobody should witness. One of those dogs was the White Shepherd, Mira, as you've named her. I remember the day she was beaten for refusing to attack a child dummy. When you stood between us and them that day, I saw something in Mira's eyes. Not wildness, but something pure. Something loyal. I can't forget that. I've sent the remaining evidence to animal welfare groups. There's a USB drive inside this envelope. Please get it to someone who can act on it. I owe those animals, and you, an apology. K. Walter sat motionless for a long time. The fire crackled, Mira stirred, but his heart burned brighter than ever, not with rage, but with resolve. 3 days later, Walter drove his old pickup to the Humane Rescue Alliance's Cheyenne office. Mira rode beside him, silent and alert. The USB drive was in his coat pocket. They were ushered into a meeting with federal reps, lawyers, and behavioral experts. Mira didn't bark or cower. She sat beside Walter with calm dignity, occasionally licking the back of his hand, reminding him quietly, "We're in this together." Inside the drive, smuggled footage, audio of dogs yelping from electric shocks, internal documents detailing plans to sell the finished dogs to overseas security firms. Animal rights organizations launched a new investigation immediately. Walter, to the media, became not just the old man with the stray dogs, but a key witness exposing an underground network. News crews came. Walter declined interviews but allowed one documentary crew, on the condition they didn't film his face or startle Mira. In the final scene of the nationally aired special, The Last Friend, the image that brought millions to tears was Mira, once abused, hunted, and caged, quietly walking into the field and placing a piece of carved wood on the ground. On it, a house, a circle, and the image of a human hand, etched by tooth and claw. A month later, the state of Wyoming granted Walter a license to open a trauma recovery center for rescued dogs. Mira Haven. Vets, researchers, and volunteers began arriving. Mira became a living symbol. She guided new dogs, comforted the skittish, and still woke Walter each morning with a gentle nudge. There's more to do. One chilly morning, as the first flakes of early winter dusted the pines, Walter received another letter, this one handwritten from his long-lost granddaughter. "I saw you on TV, Grandpa. I cried, not because you saved dogs, but because I finally saw life come back into your eyes. I want to visit, and if you'll let me, I'd like to stay and help." Walter folded the letter slowly, looking out at the white field where Mira was running with a pack of pups. He laughed quietly, wiping away a tear. The old cabin, once silent as snow, now beat again with the sounds of family, and footsteps that would never abandon him. As the spring snow slowly melted over the gray pines of the Wyoming mountains, a new current stirred quietly within the log cabin of Walter Granger, the awakening of a community, and an unprecedented wave of interest from the scientific world. The story of the Granger family had spread like a slow-burning flame, not explosive, but steadily creeping into the minds of everyone who heard it. Scientists, journalists, and even university students from top schools began making their way to the small homestead where a widowed old man once believed he would die in silence. Walter, initially reluctant, had grown used to unfamiliar cars parked along the dirt road, boots crunching snow to get closer to the dogs. Mira, the mother dog, still kept a careful distance, not hostile but cautious. The pups that once shivered in a blanket-lined basket were now grown, strong and, as noted by researchers, demonstrating exceptional social behavior. One March morning, as Walter brewed his tea, came the now familiar knock. Professor Dana Whitaker, the head of animal behavior studies at the University of Montana, stepped in with 2 assistants and a new camera rig. "We've just finished analyzing 3 weeks' worth of surveillance footage," she said as Walter poured the tea. "Walter, you won't believe it. They're not just marking territory or guarding the young. They have a patrol system, a real rotation." Walter smiled, setting down his cup. "I used to be a ranger, Professor Whitaker. I know what a patrol looks like. But hearing it about dogs, that's something else." She nodded, her expression a mix of excitement and disbelief. "It's never been documented before. They use sound to call one another. But it's not barking. It's a low-frequency hum, almost a whisper. They rotate watch duties, even share food in an organized manner." Walter looked out the window where Mira sat with 3 of her now-grown pups, sunlight streaming through the branches casting shimmering patterns on the melting snow. "I don't know why they chose me. Maybe it's because I'm old, or maybe they smelled the sorrow in me the way I saw the worry in their eyes. But from the very first day, they didn't act like wild animals. They understood." In early April, the research team hosted the first virtual symposium on what they called the Granger Canine Social Network. Scientists from Germany, Japan, and Canada joined. One renowned professor of interspecies communication posed a provocative question. Is it possible that social intelligence isn't exclusive to primates? Have we focused so much on language that we've ignored empathy, shared responsibility, trust, as a higher form of cognition? Walter didn't care much for conferences. He only wanted Mira and the pack to remain safe. But one day, a handwritten letter arrived from a high school student in the neighboring town. "Dear Mr. Granger, I used to think all dogs were dangerous if they weren't kept on a leash, but after reading about you, I started watching the stray dog behind our house, and I noticed it waits every day for my little sister to come home from school. I think maybe they understand us more than we think. Thank you for not being afraid. Thank you for showing me kindness still exists." Walter's hands trembled as he read it, but a soft smile crept onto his face. He didn't know that letter would become the opening quote in the first book, written about the Granger family, a bestseller that summer. But joy never comes without trials. One night, Walter heard the distant sound of snowmobiles. He got up, pulled on his coat, and stepped outside. Mira was already there, silent, ears fixed toward the forest. Minutes later, headlights pierced the darkness. A group of strangers with traps and rifles. "Not everyone believes in the dog's redemption," the head ranger said the next morning, after Walter reported the incident. "Some think they're dangerous tools, trained for violence and incapable of change." But then, Mira changed everything. One of the researchers, a student named Ruby, fell while checking a trail camera near the woods. She twisted her ankle badly. Mira was the first to reach her. No barking, no growling, just a gentle nudge of her nose against Ruby's face, then a glance back at Walter as if calling for help. That image, captured by the camera on Ruby's backpack, went viral. "Dog saves human," the headline read. Simple, but electrifying. Public opinion began to shift. By late spring, the state of Wyoming officially designated Walter's property as the Granger Sanctuary Zone, a pilot program for rehabilitating and reintegrating abused animals. Mira stood beside Walter at the ceremony. No leash, no commands, just presence. And when the engraved plaque reading Granger Family Sanctuary was fastened to the wooden gate, Mira lifted her head as if she knew a new chapter had begun. That night, as the fire roared in the hearth and the once frightened pups, now guarding, hunting gently and caring for each other, curled beside Mira, Walter wrote the first journal entry in years. "Once thought surviving loss meant dying quietly, but it turns out I survived to bear witness to a miracle that needed no words. Thank you for choosing me." Outside, the old snow melted into the earth, but in his heart a new season had begun. A season of hope and of connection deeper than language. Memories no longer hurt. They build bridges. Spring, snow melted slowly over the gray pines of the Wyoming mountains. But inside Walter Granger's wooden cabin, a quiet tide was rising, a wave of awakening from the community and an unprecedented curiosity from the scientific world. The story of the Granger family had spread like a slow-burning fire, not dazzling but deep, embedding itself into the hearts of everyone who heard it. Scientists, journalists, even students from major universities began arriving at the small homestead where an old widower once believed he would die in solitude. Walter, once reluctant, had grown accustomed to unfamiliar cars parked along the gravel road, boots crunching over melting snow, and curious eyes inching closer to the dogs. Mira! The mother dog still kept a polite distance, not aggressive, just watchful. The pups, once shivering bundles in a wool-lined basket, were now strong, healthy, and, according to experts, exhibited above-standard social behaviors. One March morning, as Walter brewed tea, there was a familiar knock. Professor Dana Whitaker, head of animal behavior at the University of Montana, stepped inside with 2 assistants and a new recording device. "We've just finished analyzing 3 weeks of surveillance footage," she said as Walter poured tea. "Walter, you won't believe it. They're not just marking territory or guarding pups. They have a patrol system, a literal rotation." Walter smiled, setting down the teacup. "I used to be a ranger, Dr. Whitaker. I know a patrol when I see one. But hearing it from dogs, that's something else." She nodded, eyes alight with awe. "It's never been documented before. They communicate, but not through barking. It's low frequency, almost like whispering. They rotate guard shifts, even ration food, in an orderly way." Walter looked out the window where Mira sat among 3 grown pups. Sunlight danced through the trees, casting golden patterns on the thawing snow. "I don't know why they chose me," he said. "Maybe because I'm old. Maybe because they sensed the grief I carry, just as I saw the fear in their eyes. But from the very beginning, they acted differently. They understood." By early April, the research group hosted the first online symposium on the Granger Canine Social Network. Scientists from Germany, Japan, and Canada attended. One expert on interspecies communication asked a question that stunned the forum. Is it possible that social intelligence is not exclusive to primates? Have we been so focused on language that we've overlooked empathy, trust, and communal responsibility as forms of higher cognition? Walter didn't care much for conferences. He just wanted Mira and her pups to be safe. But one day, a handwritten letter arrived from a high school student in the nearby town. "Mr. Granger, I used to think all dogs were dangerous unless kept on a leash. But after reading about you, I started watching the stray dog in my backyard. I noticed he waits for my little brother to come home from school. Every day. I think, maybe they understand more than we think. Thank you for not being afraid. Thank you for showing me that kindness still exists." Walter's hands trembled as he read, but a smile crept across his face. He didn't know that letter would later be quoted in the opening pages of the best-selling book, The Granger Family. But joy never comes without tests. One night, Walter heard the distant rumble of engines. He threw on a coat and stepped outside. Mira stood at the forest's edge, still and silent, ears tilted toward the woods. Minutes later, headlights lit up the hillside. Strangers on snowmobiles, carrying traps and rifles. "Not everyone believes in the awakening of dogs," said the head ranger the next morning, after Walter reported the incident. "Some people think once an animal's been trained to harm, it can't be untrained." But Mira changed everything. Ruby, the young researcher once saved by Mira, twisted her ankle during a routine camera check near the tree line. Mira was the first to reach her. No barking, no panic, just a gentle nudge of her nose on Ruby's cheek, followed by a glance back toward Walter, as if to say, "Help her." The moment, caught on Ruby's backpack cam, went viral. "Dog rescues human," the headline read. It was simple, but it changed minds. By late spring, the state of Wyoming officially designated Walter's land as the Granger Family Sanctuary, a pilot site for rehabilitating animals once abused or abandoned. Mira stood beside Walter during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, not on a leash, not following a command. She stood as an equal, and when the carved wooden sign was nailed to the gate, reading, "Granger Family Sanctuary," Mira lifted her head, as if she understood that a new chapter had begun. That night, as fire crackled inside, and the pups, now guarding the homestead, foraging gently, watching one another, curled beside Mira, Walter wrote his first journal entry in years. I thought surviving loss meant waiting to die in silence. Turns out I lived to witness a wordless miracle. Thank you, my dear ones, for choosing me. Outside, the old snow melted into earth. But in his heart, a new season had already begun. One of hope, of silent connection, and of healing beyond language. The seeds of love and a wordless legacy. Spring snow melted slowly over the gray pine ridges of Wyoming's mountains. But inside Walter Granger's cabin, a quiet new current was stirring. An awakening of the community, and a wave of scientific attention never seen before. The story of the Granger family had spread like a smoldering flame, not burning bright, but seeping deep into the minds of all who heard it. Scientists, journalists, even students from major universities began to visit the little farm where an old widower once thought he would die alone. Walter, initially reluctant, had grown used to strange cars parked on the gravel road, boots crunching on thawing snow, and quiet observers studying the dogs. Mira, whom the world now knew as Hope, kept her usual distance, not hostile, but watchful. The pups, once shivering in a blanket basket, were now strong and grown, displaying what researchers called hyper-socialized behavior. One March morning, as Walter brewed his tea, a familiar knock came at the door. Professor Dana Whitaker, head of the Animal Behavior Research Group at the University of Montana, stepped in with 2 assistants and a new camera. "We just finished analyzing 3 weeks of footage," she said as Walter poured her tea. "Walter, you won't believe it. They're not just protecting the young or marking territory. They've developed a rotation, an actual patrol schedule," Walter smiled, setting his cup down. "I was a ranger once, Professor Whitaker. I know what a patrol looks like. But hearing it from dogs? That's a first." Whitaker nodded, her face a blend of awe and excitement. "Never recorded before in any study. They communicate in low tones, not barks, more like whispers. They pass on watch duties. They even share food in a set order." Walter glanced out the window, where Hope sat among her grown pups. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting soft light across the clearing. "I don't know why they chose me. Maybe because I'm old. Or maybe they smelled my grief the way I saw the worry in their eyes. But from day one, they understood." In early April, the first international webinar on the Granger Canine Social Network took place. Scientists from Germany, Japan, and Canada joined in. One well-known primate communication expert asked a groundbreaking question. Is it possible that social intelligence doesn't belong solely to primates? Have we focused too much on language and forgotten that trust, shared responsibility, and empathy might also be a higher form of intelligence? Walter didn't care much for conferences. He only wanted Hope and the dogs to be safe. But then, a handwritten letter arrived from a local high school girl. "Dear Mr. Granger, I used to think all dogs were dangerous unless chained up. But after reading about you, I started watching a stray dog behind our house. I saw it wait for my little brother to come home from school every day. I think maybe they understand us more than we think. Thank you for not being afraid. Thank you for showing me kindness still exists." Walter's hands trembled slightly as he read, but the smile on his face was steady. He didn't know that this very letter would later be the opening quote in the best-selling book, The Granger Family. A new bond. But joy never comes without a challenge. One night, Walter heard snowmobiles in the distance. He rose, pulled on his coat, and stepped outside. Hope was already there, silent, ears pointed to the woods. Moments later, headlights cut through the trees, a group of strangers with traps and guns. "Not everyone believes in a canine miracle," the local ranger chief said the next morning after Walter made his report. "Some still see them as tools, once trained for bad things, always dangerous." But then, Hope changed everything. Ruby, a young researcher, twisted her ankle near the forest edge. She fell hard, unable to move. Hope was the first to reach her, not barking, not growling, just gently touching her face with her nose, then turning back to Walter, as if calling for help. That image captured on Ruby's backpack camera went viral. "Dog saves woman," the headlines read. Simple, powerful. Minds began to change. By late spring, the state of Wyoming officially recognized Walter's land as the Granger Family Sanctuary, a pilot model for rehabilitating and reintegrating abused animals. Hope stood there at the dedication ceremony beside Walter. No leash, no command. just a companion. And when the wooden plaque was mounted on the gate, engraved with Granger Family Sanctuary, Hope raised her head, almost like she knew a new chapter had begun. That night, with fire crackling in the hearth and the pups curled beside Hope, now vigilant, gentle guardians, Walter wrote in his journal for the first time in years, "I once believed I survived my losses just to die quietly, but maybe I survived to witness a wordless miracle. Thank you, my children, for choosing me." Outside, old snow melted into the ground. But inside his heart, a new season of hope of healing beyond species had just begun. The story of Walter Granger and the mother dog, who knocked on his door during a snowstorm, carries a profound lesson. Compassion and connection transcend all boundaries, whether of species, language, or unspoken grief. Walter, a widowed old man living in solitude, wasn't searching for salvation. And yet, he became the one saved when he opened his door to 4 quiet souls seeking shelter in the bitter cold. That simple act not only saved the dogs but awakened a heart long frozen by loss. In a world where kindness is sometimes mistaken for weakness, Walter reminds us, compassion is not a fleeting gesture, but the thread that ties us to our deepest humanity. The story also challenges a crucial question for our modern society. Are we seeing animals, and even people, through the lens of prejudice or through true understanding? The dogs of the Granger family had once been trained as tools, but when given love and freedom, they demonstrated social intelligence, loyalty, and even the ability to heal others. Perhaps humans too need such a chance to break free from the cages of trauma and bias that life has built around them. In the age of social media and digital noise, this quiet tale from a remote Wyoming cabin spread like a gentle breeze, reminding us that miracles still begin with the simplest acts, opening a door to someone or something in need. If we put ourselves in Walter's place, most of us have likely faced a snowstorm in our hearts, moments of grief, isolation, or doubt. But instead of shutting the world out, if we choose to open our hearts to what we don't yet understand, if we believe that love can still bloom in the coldest seasons, we might just find life again, for others and for ourselves. The greatest lesson from the Granger family doesn't lie in the extraordinary things the dogs did, but in how a human being can return to their most tender, true self, simply by listening, caring, and trusting. And perhaps in a world that often feels broken, that's the very thing we need most. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.